The original US dollar, USD, is one of the world's most powerful currencies. It serves as the official currency of the United States and several other countries. Despite having a long history in the United States, the dollar as we know it today was first printed in 1914. With the passage of the Federal Reserve Act a year after the establishment of the Federal Reserve as the nation's central bank, printing began. That's when the Fed began issuing $10 Federal Reserve notes with Andrew Jackson's portrait on them. 3 decades later, the dollar was designated as the world's reserve currency. However, its ascension to the throne began not long after the ink on the first printing in 1914 dried. Continue watching to learn how the dollar became the world's reserve currency. The first documented use of paper currency in the United States dates back to 1690, when the Massachusetts Bay Colony issued colonial notes. This currency was used to fund military operations. The first $2 bill was introduced in 1776, 9 days before the country's independence. 9 years later, in 1785, the United States officially adopted the dollar sign, based on the symbol for the Spanish-American peso. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OCC, and the National Currency Bureau were established by the government in 1863. These two organizations were tasked with handling new banknotes. In 1869, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing establishes centralized printing. Prior to this, private companies printed money. The United States Treasury assumed official responsibility for issuing the country's legal tender in 1890, more than a decade before the Federal Reserve and the dollar as we know it today. The Federal Reserve Bank was established by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 in response to the unreliability and instability of a currency system previously based on banknotes issued by individual banks. At the same time, the United States economy surpassed that of the United Kingdom to become the world's largest. However, because the majority of transactions were conducted in British pounds, world commerce remained centered on the United Kingdom. To stabilize currency exchanges, the majority of developed countries pegged their currencies to gold. However, when World War I broke out in 1914, many countries suspended their use of the gold standard in order to pay their military expenses with paper money, causing their currencies to devalue. In order to maintain its position as the world's leading currency, Britain adhered to the gold standard and found itself borrowing money for the first time during the third year of the war. Many countries that wanted to buy dollar-denominated US bonds turned to the US as their preferred lender. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard, decimating the bank accounts of international merchants who traded in pounds. By that time, the dollar had surpassed the pound as the most important international reserve currency. The United States entered World War II late, as it did in World War I prior to entering the war. The United States was the main supplier of weapons and other goods to the Allies. By the end of the war, the United States had amassed the majority of the world's gold reserves. The countries that depleted their reserves were unable to return to the gold standard as a result. In 1944, delegates from 44 Allied countries gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to devise a system for managing foreign exchange that would not disadvantage any country. The delegation agreed that the world's currencies would no longer be linked to gold, but instead could be pegged to the US dollar. This is because the greenback was historically linked to gold. The agreement was dubbed the Bretton Woods Agreement. It established a central bank authority, which would maintain fixed exchange rates between their currencies and the dollar. In exchange, the US would redeem US dollars for gold on demand. Countries had some control over their currencies when the values of their own currencies became too weak or too strong in relation to the dollar. To control the money supply, they could buy and sell their currency. The Bretton Woods Agreement established the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency, backed by the world's largest gold reserves. Other countries accumulated US dollar reserves instead of gold reserves. Countries seeking a safe place to store their dollars began purchasing US Treasury securities, which they considered to be a safe store of money. The demand for Treasury securities, combined with the deficit spending required to fund the Vietnam War and the domestic programs of the Great Society, caused the United States to flood the market with paper money. With growing concerns about the dollar's stability, countries began to convert dollar reserves into gold. The demand for gold was so great that President Richard Nixon was forced to intervene and decouple the dollar from gold, resulting in today's floating exchange rates. Despite periods of stagflation, defined as high inflation and high unemployment, the United States dollar has remained the world's reserve currency. Don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to this channel.